All right, you're very welcome along to Thursday's football show. Nathan with you for the next hour. We'll talk to Shay Given in just a little while. He's been doing a huge amount of work over the last few weeks trying to source PPE for both the NHS and the HSE here in Ireland. To chat to us about that and also about what's happening in the Championship. He is still goalkeeping coach at Derby County. Some big decisions to be made there in the next couple of days as to whether or not the Championship is to resume. And we'll talk about him just about securing his place on the Donegal Mount Rushmore. That coming up very shortly. But first, let's talk about one of his former clubs, because Celtic this week were confirmed as Scottish Premiership champions for the 9th season in a row. The season was called early. Celtic 13 points clear of Rangers with 8 games remaining. So no real question that Neil Lennon's side were going to go on and win the title. But as always with Scottish football, these things are never without controversy. I'm delighted to be joined on the line by Tom English, Chief Sports Writer with BBC Scotland. Evening, Tom.
Hey, Nathan, how's it going?
Not too bad. How are you? It's been quite a few weeks. Well, when is it not quite a few weeks in Scottish football?
No, well, it's been a couple of months kind of lockdown, but it's felt like 2 years in lockdown because you don't have enough time on your show to catalogue all of the controversies that have been going on over here, but it has been bonkers, absolutely bonkers.
How do you deal with I guess what I imagine is probably a constant stream of abuse when you go online from one side or the other, no matter what way you're calling things? Do you just blank out social media completely, or have you just come to accept it?
I know I accept it. The only one I'm on really is Twitter.
Right.
And that's about as much as I can handle.
People are very reasoned on Twitter, I find.
They are. They're very kind to me.
Yeah.
You know, they're very...
Keep up the good work.
Celtic fans, they're very philosophical when you criticise them. You know, they just take it on the chin. No, listen. If you're operating in the Scottish football environment and you've got a thin skin, then you have no business being on any social media, because they do come for you, and they don't spare the horses.
Is there any great controversy about Celtic being awarded the title?
No, there is. I mean, everyone, even Rangers fans, will probably, some of them would begrudgingly say that Celtic were the best team. Celtic were the best team by a considerable margin. I mean, they were 13 points ahead, as you say. Rangers had a game in hand. But Celtic, since the winter break, when they came back in late January, they absolutely powered away from Rangers, who stuttered. Rangers had a chance because one of the last games before the winter break, they went to Celtic Park and they beat them. First time in many, many years that they did that. And everyone at that time was thinking, well, maybe this is a substantial challenge coming from the other side of Glasgow now. But when they reappeared after the winter break, Rangers imploded and Celtic really turned it on, and they were absolutely outstanding from that point on. As soon as Rangers came with what looked like a challenge, Celtic met it head on and then just motored away from them.
It is a heck of an achievement, 9 titles in a row, and also a huge achievement, you'd have to say, for Neil Lennon, coming in just over a year ago in place of Brendan Rodgers, and the disappointment for Celtic supporters that Rodgers left. And despite all Lennon had previously achieved, it seemed as though there was a sense among Celtic supporters that this was a step back in time, really. Has he won them over with what they've done this season?
Oh, big time, yeah. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. When he was made the permanent manager again for the second time, which is after the cup final last season, the sense of disappointment was palpable. They love Neil Lennon. They will always love Neil Lennon, but they wanted something new. They had a bit of glamour in Brendan Rodgers. They wanted a bit more of that. They didn't really want Neil Lennon going back to ploughing old ground. But as soon as this season started, he had a couple of blips in Europe, but he won them back over very, very quickly, and they idolise him now. And they will, many of them will deny ever having the slightest reservation about him being reappointed. He's been excellent, Neil Lennon. He really has been terrific.
What changed then over that winter break? As you say, it felt like there was a changing of the guard perhaps when Rangers had that big victory and then just couldn't capitalise on it, and Celtic just got back into the motions again. Was the pressure too much for Rangers, or has there been any sense coming out of the Rangers cap as to how it all just fell apart?
I think the pressure was too much for them. I think their big players kind of disappeared. Alfredo Morelos, who scored buckets of goals pre-winter break, hardly scored at all after the winter break. And he was involved in a couple of, off-field things. he became a bit of a soap opera, Morelos, and they desperately needed him to deliver, and he didn't. And yet, across the east end of Glasgow, you had Moussa Dembele, you had Odsonne Edouard scoring 10 goals, or 9 goals in his last 10 games. You had Callum McGregor delivering. You had Scott Brown delivering. You had all of their big players sensing a challenge from Rangers and just upping their level. And the gap between Rangers and Celtic at the end was huge. And I've no doubt in my mind that if the games were played to a finish, if the season was played to a finish, Celtic would have won the league by more than 13 points. And you also have to say, when you look at the big picture of 9 in a row, look at the players that have come and gone in the 9 in a row. I mean, they had, spanning those years, they had Victor Wanyama, Virgil van Dijk, Moussa Dembele, Kieran Tierney, Stuart Armstrong, Fraser Forster, Dedrick Boyata, who's now playing in the Bundesliga, and Timu Pukki, who's played for Norwich. All those guys, apart from Forster, who's back on loan, all those guys were sold, and yet they continued winning titles and sold for over £100 million. So not only are Celtic doing it on the pitch, they have done it off the pitch as well. It's a very, very well-run club.
From Stephen Gerrard's point of view then, having put Rangers in such a strong position at one stage this season, where does it leave him among the Rangers supporters? Still obviously a very young manager, and it feels, again, at times Scottish football can be in a little bit of a bubble. It feels as though what's happened to Rangers hasn't done his hopes of becoming Liverpool manager at some stage much harm at all. Or maybe I'm misreading the situation. Like, if the season had gone on and Rangers finished 17, 18 points behind Celtic, would his job been at risk?
I think the supporters would have been very, very unhappy. I think a portion of them would have been calling for his head without a doubt. Has he improved Rangers? He has. They are a better team now than when he took over. They're a better team now than they were last season. They're just not good enough. You know, Celtic are just a much better team in I would say, every position. They have better players. So what happens now is that Steven Gerrard, going into next season, whenever that starts, the 10 in a row season, which has never been done, obviously, in Scotland. 9 in a row has been done by both Celtic and Rangers. He's going to be under the most horrendous pressure. Horrendous. I can't think of any other manager in European football, and I say this advisedly, who will be under more pressure than him, because the 10 in a row is this kind of mythical thing in Scotland. And I know it is a goldfish bowl that we live here, but it is massively, massively symbolic. Nobody should underestimate how significant the 10 in a row would be. And Gerrard has to stop it. He absolutely has to stop it. And if by Christmas he's not looking like he's going to stop it, I think they could well part company, because the thought of Celtic getting 10 in a row in the eyes of Rangers fans is a nightmarish scenario. Absolutely their worst nightmare.
We're obviously living through very strange times, and God knows how these clubs emerge through this financially, but I'm sure the Rangers ownership are very much aware of how important it is for their club to stop the 10 in a row. And you look at the talent that they have. You touch on Morelos, whose goal-scoring record is incredible, but is he worth the hassle is the big question for a lot of Rangers supporters. Jermaine Defoe's 37 now. Is Gerrard likely to get the backing to improve Rangers to any great extent next season?
I think he'll get some backing. He spent an awful lot of money. He spent $7 million on Ryan Kent, a bit part player, a very bit part player at Liverpool, and Kent really hasn't done his stuff. I think he will get more money. I think they're so desperate to stop the 10 in a row. He will get more money. They'll throw more cash at it, in the hope that something sticks. But I think their only hope, Rangers, is if another club comes in for Odsonne Edouard and he leaves, if another club comes in for Callum McGregor, who's a brilliant and underrated player outside Scotland, and he leaves, if a few other people leave, if Scott Brown's massive influence, even though he's like 52 years of age, Scott Brown is still the most influential midfielder, probably the most influential player in Scotland. He's a huge leader for Celtic. The Rangers are going to need an awful lot of things to happen, not just at Ibrox, but at Celtic. The levels at Celtic will have to drop significantly for Rangers to catch them, I think. And it's, at the moment, you cannot see it happening.
In terms of dealing with that pressure then, from your dealings with Steven Gerrard over the past couple of years, and you think back to his last few years with Liverpool, where it did seem at times he struggled with the emotional side of things and trying to carry an entire club on his shoulders. How's he dealt with it so far, and how do you think he will deal with it when that real pressure comes on over the next few months, if you're talking about the most under pressure manager in Europe?
Yeah, I'd like to say that I've sat down with Steven Gerrard and picked his brains, but being BBC Scotland and Rangers are not exactly kindred spirits, and haven't been for the last 4.5 years. So I haven't been at Ibrox for 4.5 years, and no beef in the BBC Scotland has either. So our access to Rangers is pretty limited. But his press conferences, which we still see, on TV and stuff, he's handled himself very, very well. He's always in control of his brief. He's a very good communicator. But the last 2 seasons that's just been a warm-up act for him. He thinks he knows about the intensity of life in Glasgow. He really doesn't. He's about to find it out now, in the grips of a possible 10 in a row. This is going to be the biggest challenge, certainly if his managerial career by far, because it's very brief. But he is in for something that I'm not sure he knows what it's all about yet. This is going to be massive for Gerrard, and the desperation and the hunger for the Rangers crowd to stop this.
The first incarnation of Neil Lennon at Celtic, I would have thought, going for a 10 in a row, knowing that pressure that Steven Gerrard is under, Lennon will be cranking it up and cranking it up and cranking it up. Has it been a different Neil Lennon over the last 18 months, that actually he's just a little bit calmer about all of this?
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I mean, I had a good hour-long conversation with him the other week, and he is definitely calmer. Time was when Neil Lennon used to fight every fight, try to win every single battle, was railing against the world. I think trying to prove himself worthy of the position of Celtic manager. I think that was part of it. But now I think he's more comfortable in his job. He knows he can do the job, and he is chilled out quite a bit. I still think Neil Lennon outside of Scotland is underrated. Brendan Rodgers got all the credit because he won all the trophies while he was in Scotland. Never lost a trophy. The invincible season in 2016, 2017, Celtic were phenomenal. I think this Celtic team for the season just finished played every bit as well as that Brendan Rodgers team did. Every bit as well. And I'm not sure Neil Lennon will get the credit for that. They performed better in Europe under Neil Lennon than they did under Brendan Rodgers, like considerably better. Neil Lennon beat Barcelona in his first incarnation. Came very, very close, 3 minutes into injury time, and getting a result in the Camp Nou, and then beat Lazio late last year, the autumn of last year, beat Lazio home and away in the Europa League. I mean, these are results that Brendan Rodgers did not get in Europe. So I think Neil Lennon is he's been outstanding. He really has, and he has changed as a character. There's no doubt about that.
Well, fast forward a year then, and say Celtic do the 10 in a row. Where are we talking about Neil Lennon then in the pantheon of Celtic greats in terms of Jock Stein and Martin O'Neill? Does 10 in a row get you a statue outside Celtic Park?
Well, what have they got out there at the moment? It's a high bar. They've got Brother Walford, who founded the club. They've got Jimmy Johnston, their greatest player, and they've got Billy McNeil, their greatest leader. So Neil Lennon is going to have to go some, although they got plenty of space out the front of there, Nathan. So they might throw one up for him while they're at it. 10 in a row would take him past Jock Stein in terms of league titles and consecutive titles and all the rest of it. But nobody, if he won 20 in a row, he would never be considered as good as Jock Stein. Nobody would. It's 1967. That just lives on forever, and rightly so. I mean, what Stein did at Celtic was extraordinary. Lennon wouldn't be far off top three, top four.
Who's top three, top four at the moment? So Steen won.
Martin O'Neill, without question, would be up there. And then you'd be going way back in time, as well. I mean, Billy McNeil wouldn't be far off the conversation either. There's a lot, but Lennon to do it twice, to go away, and then to come back and to do it again, especially after Rodgers left. Rodgers Leicester fluttered their eyelashes at him and he was gone like a scalded cat. He was out at Glasgow, and Celtic had a game the next day at Hearts, and Lennon just jumped into the breach. He was there when they desperately needed him, and he settled everything down. They won the league, they won the cup. Come back this season, they've won the league, they've won the League Cup. They'll be favourites whenever the Scottish Cup gets to be played. Could be later on this year, could be early next year. They'll be roaring hot favourites to win that. That would be 4 trebles in a row. And Neil Lennon would have been involved in many of those. So, listen, I would hate to put myself into trouble with Celtic fans by saying he's top 3, top 4, top 5, but he would be immortal. Put it that way.
That'll do, I guess, among Celtic supporters. You touched on some of the big results from the season just gone in Europe, and particularly winning home and away at Lazio. There was that late implosion against Copenhagen, which saw them go out of the Europa League. And it's hard to see Celtic getting back to a Martin O'Neill level where they can contest European finals again. Is there some relief for Lennon there that actually is he being judged on European success as much as previous managers are? Is there an acceptance that actually Celtic, with the way modern football has gone, just can't really compete at that level anymore?
No, if you're Celtic manager, you're judged on everything. You're judged on a training session. You're judged on a 5-a-side match. There's no respite at all from the pressure. And they say, I think Gordon Strachan, when he was Celtic manager, I think once said you're one bad result away from a crisis at Celtic, and that is true. It's a very, very difficult club to manage. The expectations are through the roof. Europe, they all want to win Europe. Europe will always have a kind of special place in the minds and the hearts of Celtic fans because of what happened in 1967. And they take great pride in the atmosphere at Celtic Park on European nights. I mean, we've had Lionel Messi, we've had all the Iniesta, with Xavi, we've had some of the great players have come to Celtic Park and have said it's the greatest atmosphere they've ever had experienced away from their own stadium. And Celtic fans love to hear that. They absolutely bask in that stuff. So Europe will always be dear to them. I think they really messed up against Copenhagen. They had a great chance and they just fell in a heap.